Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for Look Up and Listen presents a virtual monster mash. I am Molly Davis, WFDD's Assistant General Manager. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for Look Up and Listen presents a virtual monster mash. And I had a technical issue. I'm so sorry about that. I'm going to be your MC for the night. I'm so glad you're here. As you all know, typically this time of year, we gather in Hanging Rock State Park under the stars around the campfire for our annual Look Up and Listen outdoor listening party. And this was just not the year because of COVID that we could safely do that. So we put together what we hope is going to be a really fun evening for you in this virtual platform. And we appreciate you joining us. We've got some great special guests who are going to share with us how to make a cocktail, how to make a dessert. We've got some stargazing information, which, as you know, the weather's not permitting us to actually go outside and look at the stars, but we've got a great presentation from Forsyth Astronomical Society, and then some wonderful local storytellers are going to share some spooky stories with us to close out the evening. So we thank you so much for being on this adventure with us. We've never really done anything quite like this before, but we're glad you're here. And to kick things off, I'm going to welcome Tim Nolan. Tim is the owner of Fair Witness Fancy Drinks, and he is going to teach us how to make a fun cocktail. Tim, are you ready to join us?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. So tell us what we're making.
Okay, so we're gonna make a drink that some people call an Omaha Sour. Tonight I called it a loup-garou because that's French for werewolf, and it's one of my favorite little phrases. The reason why I chose this drink is because it's sort of infinitely modifiable. So it's a classic whiskey sour, and we've just put a little twist on it by using rooibos tea. Things that you need to know. First of all, you always have to shake a sour drink. It's to combine all of your citrus and your and the whiskey. But it's super easy. We're going to do 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice.
All right, I'm doing this along with you. I've got all my stuff here.
3/4 of an ounce of the syrup. We're going to not knock that down. I believe in myself. Okay, and then about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces of our bourbon. Fill our shaker with ice. Give it a few shakes. We're just combining, and we're trying to add a little bit of water to get everything together. I'm going to strain that into a glass. Add some fresh, unshaken ice. And you're ready to party.
All right, let's see. Oh, that's delicious.
That's the point.
So before we got started, you were telling me a little bit about sours and how you can sort of...
So like almost all of the most famous drinks are in the sour family. Everything from a daiquiri, which is sort of a rum sour, to a margarita, which is a tequila sour. You've got whiskey sours, Tom Collins, these are all sours, right? But it's sort of infinitely variable because you get to choose, do I want gin, rum, tequila, whiskey? And then just by slightly altering what you use to sweeten the drink, you can really add a lot of depth. I encouraged everybody out there to pick a different flavor of rooibos tea if they did. And Wade at Angelina's has like 30 different varieties. So you could have a gingery one or a bourbony one. Kind of do whatever you want. And that's super fun. Like you could make a chamomile tea, or you could make Earl Grey and make a gin sour. So I was hopefully just sparking everyone's imagination. And now you can go from there and do whatever you want.
Well, so true confession time, I actually didn't have rooibos tea, so I made a mandarin orange spice simple syrup from mandarin orange spice tea, and it turned out really good. All right, well, I think we lost Tim. He might have had some connection issues, but I think we were ready to move on. So I hope everybody had fun mixing up their cocktail. Here's mine. If you're there watching and you've got your cocktail, virtual cheers to you. We want to thank Tim for joining us tonight. And I want to move on and welcome Chris Falk. He is the chef at Quanto Basta. and he is going to take us through making our yummy dessert tonight. Chris, what are we making?
Hi, tonight we're going to do Oreo stuffed pumpkin cheesecake. The reason I picked this was it's a very family-friendly recipe, something you can make with kids, and since they probably won't be trick-or-treating, this is something they can do on Saturday night before they sit in to watch movies or whatever. I know my daughter and her friend are going to make these on Saturday, so it's a very simple recipe, and the good thing about cheesecakes are you can change them around however you want, add things. So if you don't like pumpkin, you can just make a regular cheesecake. Or in the springtime, you can use like a mint Oreo cookie and do a mint chocolate chip cheesecake, anything you'd like. So first of all, you would take a muffin pan and put cupcake holders in there, and then put little Oreo cookies down in the bottom of it. So basically, like the Oreo is going to be the crust of the cheesecake. And then in the mixing bowl, you want to soften up your cream cheese with your sugar. So I went ahead and did that because that's the longest part. So I've got this bowl with the soft soft cream cheese and sugar already mixed, and I'll start adding all the other ingredients, which I believe they sent out the ingredients with the registration.
Yeah, we did, and they're available on our website as well. If you didn't get them by email, they're on our website. Now the Oreo is not crushed up; it's just a whole Oreo, right?
The whole Oreo. I don't know if you can see it.
Yep.
Something like that. And then add some pumpkin, canned pumpkin or pureed pumpkin. One egg. A little bit of vanilla extract. Cinnamon and nutmeg. And if you're not a fan of either one of those, of course, you can take it out. They're just flavorings. A little bit of all-purpose flour. Oops. And just a little pinch of salt. And we'll mix this up, and I apologize, Molly, you might want to talk now because this is going to get loud. And you won't be able to hear me for a moment. So.
Okay, well, you do what you got to do. All right, is everybody following along? Mixing up your cheesecake?
Whenever you're using a mixing bowl, make sure you scrape down the sides and get the paddle. You know, if you don't have a mixer, you can do this in a regular bowl or with a handheld mixer. But just take a little bit longer. In the restaurant, we try to always make it as easy as possible on us.
So, Chris, it seems to be sometimes that cheesecake seems a little bit intimidating to some people, but from what you're doing, it seems like it's really a pretty simple dessert to make.
Cheesecake can be very intimidating, but I think it's usually the baking part of it. But these ones, this is about as simple as you can make it. First of all, the mixer does all the work for you. You just throw everything in there and turn it on. And then you want it to be a nice, smooth consistency. I don't know if that's able to tell. But so that all the cream cheese, there's no lumps in it. And then just like with a larger cheesecake, you do a full-size one, you just have your crust down and you just fill up the container, whatever you're baking it in, about 2/3 of the way full, because it will rise up when you're baking it. So, and you'll just fill each of these.
Is it the egg that gives it the lift?
Yes, and frothiness too. You'll notice kind of hard to see on the screen, but it looks very light. So I'm not going to do all of them. So you'll be standing here for 10 minutes watching me spoon these out. So when you get them in, you'll put them in an oven and it's been preheated at 325. And it'll take between 20 to 25 minutes. Every oven's a little bit different. This might be my third batch of these so that I wouldn't mess them up. And both times I pull them out at 23 minutes. You stick a toothpick in it, and if it comes out clean, it's ready, just like brownies or something like that. And after you bake it, you want to bring it out and pull it out of the muffin pan. Try not to burn the tips of your fingers. Just like pick it up like this. And if you have a cooling rack, sit it on that. If not, just a plate. Put it in the refrigerator. You can let it cool at room temperature, but it'll take twice as long. And if you've got children, you know, they're not going to want to wait that long. So when it comes out, after you've cooled it, you can pull it out of the muffin pan, and you can see the Oreo on the bottom. But another trick we're going to do before, and this is actually the hardest part of the cheesecake, is we're going to make a chocolate spiderweb on top. And actually the hardest part is getting this into the bag without me making a huge mess. It's like a rule when you're working with chocolate, you have to get it all over you. I'm putting it into a piping bag, which not everybody has. What you can do is get like a Ziploc sandwich bag. And just put it in there.
Now, is that melted chocolate?
Yes, it's just melted milk chocolate. I just threw it in the microwave. I believe the recipe was for half a cup, and that was plenty to do 12 little cheesecakes.
So, but you have to be pretty careful when you melt chocolate in the microwave, though, right? Not to overheat it.
Correct. I go for like 20 seconds, stop, stir it up a little bit, 20 more seconds, and you can just keep cooking it. Once you go too far, there's no fixing it. So, and then you would take the Ziploc bag and with a pair of scissors, just cut the tip off. And like I said, this is the hardest part.
I don't want to break your concentration, but Chris, we had a question from Hannah who asked for a reminder what the oven temperature should be. I think you said 325?
325, yes. And so, I don't know if you can see it, make a little spiral.
Yep.
Can't tell if y'all can see it. And then take something sharp like a knife, which I forgot to bring out here, so I'll use the knife or the scissors, since I'm not eating this. Or a toothpick. And then you would just very carefully start in the center and go out. And you see, you make a little spider web.
Oh yeah, it looks great. Cool.
Just enjoy it. It's very simple.
Well, thank you so much for doing this with us and taking the time to show us how to make these Oreo cheesecakes. I've already seen some comments of people saying they can't wait. And some of our other presenters saying, darn it, now I want an Oreo cheesecake. So thanks so much, Chris. If anybody has any other questions about the process of making the cheesecake or the process of making your cocktail, please just put them in the live chat. And then we can ask Chef Chris and Tim as we go along and get you answers. So if you need anything else or have any other questions or comments, please just put them in the live chat and we will get to them. We already talked. Thank you, Chris, so much. We already talked about the poor weather tonight. As we all know, stargazing is always at the mercy of weather, and we're not going to see any stars if we go outside right now. We're all just going to get really wet in the rain. So our friends at Forsyth Astronomical Society were kind enough to put together a brief presentation that will take us through what some of the night sky objects we could see on a clear night this season. So it's about a 5-minute presentation. So as you're finishing up your cheesecakes and getting them ready to get in the oven, if you're still working on that, then you can also have this playing while you're doing that. If you've already got your cheesecakes in the oven and you're ready to just settle in, you can take your laptop to a comfy place and sit back, and we'll watch this presentation from Forsyth Astronomical Society.
The fall is a nice time to go stargazing. It's starting to get cool, but not too cold. It gets dark earlier, and standard time means you don't have to stay out too late. If you look toward the southeast, you might notice a large square high in the sky. This is the Great Square of Pegasus. If we add a few more stars and with a bit of imagination, we find that Pegasus is actually an upside-down flying horse. To the left of Pegasus is the constellation Andromeda. Now, Andromeda itself is not too interesting. However, if you can find some dark skies and have binoculars or telescope, you might be able to spot the Andromeda galaxy only 2.5 million light years away. Down below the Great Square, you might notice what looks like an orangish, reddish star. Yes, this is Mars, the red planet. In fact, tonight it should be hanging around near an almost full moon. Mars rises before sunset, so it will be visible all night. Mars has just reached what astronomers call opposition, that is, exactly opposite the sun from the Earth. This is also its closest approach to the Earth, so Mars will be brighter than normal. Look for that orange tint. Can't miss it. Normally, Mars doesn't reveal much through a telescope. It usually appears as a small orange disk with very little features. However, because of its close approach, a sharp-eyed observer under clear skies might be able to spot some detail through a telescope. Now look toward the south to the southwestern horizon. Two of the most interesting planets are in view. Jupiter, the king of the planets, is clearly brighter than the surrounding stars. Jupiter's 4 Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, are visible through a small telescope and possibly even with binoculars. Saturn, the ring planet, is a bit dimmer, but visible just to the left of Jupiter. A telescope is required to spot the rings in its largest moon, Titan. You'll find them both trailing the teapot of Sagittarius. Don't wait too late, they both set just after 11 p.m. To the north, high in the sky, is the Queen Cassiopeia. You might find it looks like a large letter M. Lower in the sky is Ursa Minor, the small bear, better known as the Little Dipper, with a North Star at the end of its handle. The Little Dipper is somewhat dim. I can usually only see the North Star and the 2 stars at the end of the bulb. By the way, the North Star is not the brightest star in the sky. That distinction belongs to Sirius. The North Star is actually relatively dim. It is just situated so that it remains stationary in the night sky as the other stars appear to rotate about it. Unlike the Little Dipper, the Big Dipper is not very prominent in the fall, although you might be able to spot a portion of it very low on the horizon. For you early birds, the brightest of the planets is visible in the morning just before sunrise. That's Venus. You can't miss it. Venus is always distinctly brighter than the stars. Although through a telescope you won't see much detail other than the fact that Venus has phases, like the moon. Now you have to get up early for this one. Venus rises about 5 a.m. and will be visible in the east until just before sunrise, which is at 7:40 a.m. You might need some help to find all this in the night sky. The good news is that most of us have smartphones and tablets, and there are many astronomy apps available. Most apps have something called augmented reality. You simply hold your phone or tablet up to the sky and the app will tell you what you're looking at. I've listed a few here. Thank you for listening. The Forsyth Astronomical Society can be found online at fas37.org and on Facebook.
Okay. I'm going to take a minute and see if Tim will join us again for just a moment, because Tim, we had a question. Your ingredients for your cocktail included optional egg whites. And we had a viewer who asked how the egg whites would get incorporated.
Oh, so the main thing that you want to do if you want to use an egg white is you shake your cocktail together, add your about 3/4 of an ounce of egg white or the white of one egg. And then when you shake it all together, you're going to strain it off the ice and then shake it by itself, just the liquids with no more ice. And what you'll end up with, if you really have to work your arm out doing it, but you get a really beautiful thick consistency. So I didn't want to take a ton of time up, but there's a whole history of like a margarita is technically a fancy sour because it uses triple sec instead of sugar. And then there's also the traditional sour, which is this kind of a fizz that uses egg white to make it like a liquor milkshake.
Okay, fascinating.
Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So as I said before, if you've got any other questions about the dessert or the cocktail, continue to put those in the live chat and we'll try to get those answered for you, either in the chat or I can ask our guests to come back on and answer them quickly like that. Now I want to move on to our first storyteller of the evening. So it's a great time to get cozy and comfy wherever you are. We had hoped that everybody could be outside by a fire pit or something, but that's not happening in this weather. So get comfy. We're going to welcome our first storyteller of the night. Dan Sellers is the host and producer of the Carolina Hates podcast, and he has an exciting and spooky story to share with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to tell you this story that was featured in the second season of the podcast. In the western region of North Carolina sits the quiet town of Valley Crucis, a small mountain community located on Highway 194. Its name means Valley of the Cross, as two nearby streams cross at almost right angles in the valley where the town lies. They form the rough shape of a cross. Valley Crucis is home of the first Mass General Store and to St. John the Baptist Episcopal Church. Reverend William West Skiles founded Valley Crucis and built St. John's in the 1840s. Accessible by just an old dirt road, the small wooden church sits isolated on a lonely ridge with an ancient, withered graveyard attached. St. John's lost its congregation years ago, and now the nearby Church of the Holy Cross cares for the old building. Today, it's only used for special services and to house the ghosts that reside there. Popular legend claims that a new young priest came to St. John's with ideas of growing a small church, but instead the congregation slowly dwindled to nothing. Distraught over his failure, the heartbroken priest hung himself from the bell tower. It's a sad story and completely bogus. There's no record of a new priest ever coming to St. John's, and no record of a suicide within its walls. Reverend Skiles passed away of natural causes in 1862 and prominently lies buried in the graveyard. But just because that story isn't true doesn't mean there isn't a ghost at St. John's. Too many people have seen and heard things that they can't explain. Tapping noises and footsteps can be heard. Mysterious lights witnessed. A group of at-state students ran from the building in terror when all their flashlights went out simultaneously. I've been there myself in the middle of a cold and rainy night, and I can personally attest to the place's creepy factor. Michael Reniger tells the story of Mitch and Rhonda, who parked near the church for some privacy. Just as Mitch was about to kiss Rhonda, She jerked away and whispered, "There's a man watching us." Mitch looked and saw a man backlit from the light inside. He wore a black hat and long garments. Mitch couldn't see the man's face, but could tell he was not very happy. Over Rhonda's objections, Mitch decided to go apologize to the man, who he assumed was the priest from the Church of the Holy Cross. The door was unlocked, and the lights were still on when Mitch entered. But he didn't see anyone there. "Hello," he called as he made his way down to the pulpit. "I just wanted to say sorry." But no one answered. Where could the man have gone? Church isn't that big, and after all, the door was unlocked with the lights on. Just then, a chill wind swirled around Mitch, and he screamed his apology to thin air as he ran from the building. As they drove away, he looked in his rearview mirror and noticed that the lights were now off inside the building. A female apparition has also been seen in the area, as well as unexplained gunshots and a woman crying. But if you go looking for the ghost of St. John's, beware. Something lurks in the misty shadows of Valley Crucis. The story goes that two men were driving past St. John's Church on a clear autumn night when a shadow leapt from behind one of the graves and across the road in front of them. The driver slammed on brakes to avoid whatever it was, and when they stopped, the men were staring at a dog, a big damn dog. It was as tall and wide as a full-grown man and described as part Rottweiler, part bear. Its black fur bristled as the animal snarled, baring its sharp, yellow teeth at the car. But what really terrified the men were the beast's eyes. They glowed red in the dark night, as if lit by the very fires of hell. "Do you see that?" the driver asked. "No," said his pal, "and neither do you." The dog began to slowly stalk toward the car, and the driver immediately slammed his foot down on the gas. They raced down the mountain road, skittering around each corner. The man in the passenger seat put his arm around the driver's shoulder. He tried to tell him to slow down, that they were safe now. But as he turned, he saw the beast was giving chase, and it was gaining on them. Finally, the car crossed the bridge where the two streams meet, and the dog slid to a stop, unwilling, it seemed, to cross the water. And this isn't an isolated claim. Many people have reported seeing the beast with glowing red eyes. Some call it the hellhound. Others call it the broadstone hound. But most know it as the demon dog of Valley Crucis. That's the story.
Thank you so much, Dan.
You're welcome.
Spooky. Now, have you experienced this personally?
No, I've been there several times, like I said, in the middle of the cold, rainy night, and it's a spooky place, but I didn't see the dog. And I was looking, I can tell you that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing that story.
Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. We're going to move on now to our next storyteller. Sandra has a personal anecdote to tell us. Is that right, Sandra?
Correct. It was a very dark night in October in this small eastern North Carolina town. All the porch lights in the neighborhood were out. My husband and young son and I had settled in for the evening when suddenly there was a knock at the door. My husband opened the door, switched on the porch light, and immediately slammed the door and locked it. He turned to me, the color drained from his face, and he said, "Call the police." I grabbed my young son and we ran to the back bedroom to phone. And my husband picked up the extension in another room, and I heard him say, "There's a casket on our front porch." Images then swirled in my mind of a recent article that had been in the local newspaper about coffins being found partially unearthed in an old cemetery due to flooding. But just as I was thinking about that, I heard some snickering and some muffled laughter right outside the bedroom window. So I interrupted the phone call with, "Wait a minute, I think this is a joke." To which the police officer said, "Well, it's not a very funny one." So we cautiously made our way back to the front door, switched on the light, slowly opened it, and yes, there was an old-fashioned wooden casket on the porch, complete with a corpse in a black suit, hands crossed across his chest, his eyes closed, and a big toothy grin. And I recognized this semi-departed person as a student of mine. However, my husband did not know the student. So you see, the high school drama department was rehearsing for a play that included a funeral scene, and they and their zany director decided this would be a great diversion for the evening, especially since Halloween was approaching. So let's go to the house of the new teacher in town. So off they went. The yard was soon overflowing with all the students who were enjoying the results of their prank, as well as many neighbors who had watched the funeral procession move down the street. Needless to say, in this small eastern North Carolina town where you make your own fun, we were the talk of the town the next day. And my husband and I remember the casket on the porch every year when Halloween rolls around.
Oh, that's a great story, Sandra. You know, I told you right before we kicked off that I was just could not wait to hear how it ended because I had only heard the very beginning. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's really fun. So you are now, you're a retired music teacher, right? Music
I
teacher?
am.
And living in Watauga County?
I am. We've been in Boone for 40 years, so.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being with us tonight and sharing your story. I really
enjoyed it.
Okay, next up, we have Lona Bartlett. Lona is a performance artist, storyteller, puppeteer, and educator. And Lona, you have a story for us.
I do. This story is actually one that originates in the Appalachian Mountains. And I don't know if all of you know this or not, but the Appalachian Mountains actually start in Georgia and they go all the way up into Maine. And I'm from the Appalachian Mountains in upstate New York. But I love the stories that also come from this area of the Appalachian Mountains. And this is why, if you go up there, you might see some roofs or some window frames painted the color blue. Claire was a beautiful girl, and when she walked into the dance, it only took a half a second for Johnny to notice her. Oh, those eyes. They reached out to Johnny like a cat lapping up water. It put him in a spell, and he walked toward Claire. And Claire gave him a little wink. He reached out his hand as if in a trance, and Claire took her hand. She placed it in his. The two of them went out on the dance floor, and they turned and they swirled. And before the dance was done, they were already talking about getting married. Well, Johnny, if you don't mind, I really want to do this immediately. Immediately? Yes, I mean, I really want to be your wife. I mean, I know you're the one for me. And so the next day, they went down to the justice of the peace and they took their vows. Well, Johnny, of course, moved Claire into his home immediately, and it wasn't hard. I mean, she only had a suitcase and a broom with her. And when they got into the house, Claire said, Johnny, I want to be a perfect wife for you, and tonight I would just love to make you, a special dinner for our wedding night. Johnny looked at Claire and said, that'd be right nice if you would. Claire put her things away and She put the broom in the kitchen. And funny as it was, she put the suitcase out there too. And she started making this wonderful dinner. There was a roast with potatoes and carrots and collard greens. And she put it in front of Johnny. And he said, "This smells wonderful. Go ahead and eat it, Johnny. I know you'll like it." Johnny sat down and he ate and he ate and he ate and he finished his whole plate. And then suddenly his head began to swirl. Claire looked over with a bit of a wicked grin and said, "Johnny, are you getting tired?" "Well, I don't know what it is, but yes, I am. I'm swirling." "Let me help you to the bedroom." Claire helped Johnny over to the bed, and as soon as his head hit the pillow, he was out. He didn't wake up until the next morning, and Claire was out in the kitchen making breakfast for him. This went on day after day and night after night. Every time Johnny ate dinner, his head began to swirl and swoon. He went to bed and fell asleep immediately. This just didn't seem right. So he went off and went to go talk to the old woman on the hill. Now, the old woman was the matriarch of the community. She had been there for 3.5 generations, maybe 4. And she had the wisdom of all of those years. Johnny went on up the hill and knocked on the door, and she opened it. "Oh, Johnny, well, it's good to see you. Why don't you come on in and sit down and tell me what problems you're having today?" Johnny went in and he sat down in a large armchair. "Johnny, what's going on?" He told her his story about how Claire and he had gotten married so quickly, and that every night when he eats dinner, that the food makes his head swirl, and he's got to go to bed and just sleep it off. The old woman sat back and crossed her arms. And she said, "Johnny, she's got green eyes, doesn't she?" Johnny said, "Yes, she's got the most amazing green eyes." "Oh, Johnny, I know what's happened. You married yourself a boo hag." "A what?" "You married yourself a boo hag. Now, Johnny, here's the problem, though. I've seen this happen before. And a boo hag, now, you know, after a while, she'll get tired of you. And she's gonna just kind of split you open, eat out your innards, and then she's gonna go on to the next town and move on. When you wake up, you're gonna be dead. You got to get rid of her." Johnny didn't know what to do. He looked at the old woman and said, "So how do I do this? How do I get rid of a boo hag?" "Oh, it's pretty simple, but it's hard. Because, Johnny, you got to fool her. And it's hard to fool a boo hag. What you got to do is you got to go down and get yourself some blue paint. One that's the color of the sky and the sea. And you're going to have to paint, when she leaves the house, you're going to have to paint all the window frames. You're going to have to paint your doors, and you're going to have to paint your chimney too, because she's going to want to come back in the house. And she's not going to be like she looks now. You see, a boo hag is pretty on the outside, but ugly and evil on the outside, or in the inside. Outside beautiful, inside ugly. So you're going to end up having to not eat that dinner tonight. When you go to bed, you got to pretend you're sleeping. When she comes in to see if you're asleep or not, you got to make sure you can fool her, Johnny. And if you dare, you can go out and watch and see what's going on next. She's going to peel off all her skin, and she's going to fly out of that house. That's when you got to paint all those windows and the door. Johnny's heart was beating and thumping as hard as it possibly could. He left and he went down to the hardware store and he bought himself a gallon of blue paint, the color of the sky and the sea. He took that paint home and he hid it out in the shed. He walked into the house and Claire was there. "Oh my, Johnny, but I haven't seen you all day." "Well, I know, but I've had lots of business down in town." "Well, Johnny, I'm going to make you a wonderful, wonderful dinner tonight." I'm sure you are." And when it was dinner time, Johnny sat down at the table. He put a napkin in his lap, and each time Claire turned her head away from him, he picked up a bit more, and he shoveled it down into that napkin. When he got about half of his meal down in that napkin, he carefully, under the table, folded it up carefully and hid it up under his shirt. "You know, Claire, I'm right tired already." "But Johnny, you've only finished half of your meal." You know, I'm gonna fall asleep anyway, and I'm just tired as can be. I'm gonna go ahead and go on to bed." "Well, Johnny, you go ahead and do that then." Johnny made sure that napkin stayed up under his shirt. He went to his bedroom. He laid down. And it didn't take long for Claire to come in, open the door, and peek in. Johnny's quiet stillness convinced Claire of his slumber. She closed the door and walked down the hall and went into the kitchen. Johnny heard her in there, so he quietly got up. He walked to the door. He opened it, walked down the hall, and peeked around the corner at Claire. And there she was. She had split her head all the way up the back of her neck, down through her scalp. And she was peeling the skin off her body. She yanked and she pulled and she dug and she tugged it down off her. And the creature that emerged was a slimy, horrid, wicked-looking creature, and she was all green. And she grabbed her broom. She jumped on it, and she had opened the window in the kitchen, and she flew out of it. Johnny ran out to the shed. He got his bucket of paint. He ran back in the house, and he commenced to painting around all of the windows in his home. He had to sit on window sills to paint the outside to keep her from coming back in. He painted all of his doors. He got all of the windows done. He went upstairs and he sat on the windowsills and he painted all of those. And just as sunrise was coming, you see, what I didn't tell you was that the sun burns out the wicked. And Johnny knew that if she didn't have her skin back, that sun was going to burn her up because the old woman had told him so. Johnny sat back as the sun was rising and he heard that again. Claire came to the kitchen window. Ow! Blue! I want my skin. She went to the door. Johnny, I want my skin. She went to the upstairs windows. I want my skin. And then she went to the chimney. The chimney! He had forgotten to paint the chimney. He grabbed that bucket of paint and went to the fireplace, and he painted all around the fireplace. As Claire had gone in and was coming down, she was locked in that fireplace. I want my skin. She raced back out and went back up that chimney, and as she did, the sun rose. And Claire burned up in the sun. And Johnny was rid of that boo hag. That's my version of the boo hag. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lona, for that very spooky and exciting story. Appreciate you so much. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you very much. I'm going to move on now. Cynthia, I see you have your camera on.
Yes, and I got my audio on too.
Okay.
Trying to
So,
get cameras. There you go.
welcome Cynthia Moore Brown, who is a professional storyteller and author based in Summerfield. And Cynthia, you have a story to tell us.
Yes, and these ghost stories have been wonderful from everyone. I lived in a haunted house as a young girl, and that's how I got started loving stories that were spooky and ghostly, and had been writing my stories from then on. I've got my favorite book that I wrote is Ghost Tales of the Piedmont, North Carolina. So I'm going to tell you a story from there tonight. I'm dedicating it to my husband, Fred. He passed away to the spirit world this year, but he's with me always. And he also loved this story. Every place we went, I would have to tell this story. I think he liked it because it's true. You can actually visit where it takes place. And I'll tell you that later if you want to know. And it takes place right here in Greensboro on the way to High Point. In the pines, where the sun never shines, and the cold and the chilly wind blows. True love, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? The road from Greensboro to Jamestown to High Point was very rugged and rough back in those days. The curve right beside the road, right before you met the railroad bridge and went under the tunnel, was so dangerous that most folks said they should just move the road. He was driving in his old car. His windshield wipers weren't keeping the rain away. It was coming down too hard. As he peered ahead into the fog and the darkness, he could barely see anything. He knew he was going to have to just pull over and stop, and that's when he saw her. He couldn't believe his eyes at first, but then he realized it was a young lady in a long, strange, beautiful white dress, and the rain was coming down, and she was soaking wet, but she was all alone. So he slowed his car down and stopped. You know, back in those days, you could stop and help folks. He opened his door and walked around the front of the car. And as he got close to her, he saw that indeed she was very beautiful. She had white skin, and her hair was long, but it was tangled with leaves and stones and sticks. And her dress, it was beautiful too, but it was dirty and ripped, and the stones and the leaves were stuck on. He said, oh my gracious, you've had a hard time tonight. Could I offer you a ride? I'd be glad to take you anywhere. Can I help you? First, she was totally silent. She just stared at him with those huge green eyes. But when he looked into them, they were so cold, so sad, that he had to back away. She never did answer him. Instead, she just started kind of gliding towards his car. He was going to open the front door, but instead she was going towards his back door. So he opened the car door, and she slowly got in. When she passed close to him, she was so cold, he could feel the freezing cold emanating from her. And she sat down. He said, here, take this and put this over you. This is my grandmother's quilt. She made it for me to bring the car for when you need to be warm. And Lord have mercy, you need to be warm. He closed the door, and his mind was just a whirl. She was so beautiful and so pretty. And what would he say to her? And where was she going? And took a deep breath, got back in the car. He started driving, and he went on under the railroad bridge. He was just past it in Jamestown, and he was trying to talk to her and was just so nervous he didn't know what to say. And then he finally said, where can I take you? She did not say a word. Instead, she pointed one long skeletal hand straight ahead, and he looked, and he thought he could see in the trees a vague light glimmering. He drove on and then stopped at what he thought was the driveway for the place, and he started to pull in, but the driveway, it was full of rocks and fallen trees. There was no way he could drive up that driveway. So he turned to her and he said, I'll just walk you to the door. We can go together. I got a light here. So he got out of his door and turned around and went to the back of the car. He opened up the door to let her out. And when he did, he screamed because the back seat was empty. She had gone, vanished. He whirled around looking everywhere. Maybe she'd gone up in the woods by herself. Hello, hello. But there was no answer. He started falling and walking and trying to get up that driveway. Still, hello. But he didn't see or hear anything. As he got closer to the top of that little hill, he saw a little house. And yes, a light. He thought, well, maybe she's already in there. So he went as fast as he could up there. He knocked on the door. No answer. It was so dark, so terrifying. He tried again. And then the door opened, just a tiny bit. There stood a tiny little woman, older, with a sad, sad look. He said, "Ma'am, I picked a nice young lady up down on the road. I wondered was she coming here. I just wanted to make sure she got in the house okay." But the woman just shook her head. Then he saw a tear slipping down her cheek. She shook her head again and she said, "Oh, oh, it's happening again. You see, every year on this night, it rains. And every year on this night, someone tries to bring my daughter, Lydia, home. She never can come home. You see, she died down on that curve right by the bridge. She and her husband were coming home from Greensboro. She was killed. And from that night on, she has tried to come home, but can't. She just can't. Thank you, young man. Thank you for trying to help her home. It's the kindness of these folks that make me saddest." He listened for a minute. He said, "No, wait a minute. No, you must be, it must be some kind of joke or story. You see, she was in my car. I know. I saw her. She was there. I talked to her." The woman just shook her head. She said, "No, no, I'm so sorry. This is what happens every year, just one night a year. She'll appear on the side of the road." He just couldn't believe it. He stepped back and he didn't know what to do. He was just flabbergasted. And then he looked down and he saw on a table next to the door a framed picture. It was a pretty picture of a beautiful young lady. And he picked it up and he said, "This is her. She was in my car. This is her." "Don't understand. That's my daughter. That's my Lydia. I'm telling you, she died 20 years ago." He was so beside himself, he was ready to cry. He wouldn't take no for an answer until finally she said, "All right, I'm going to have to show you, aren't I?" She wrapped her cloak around her and got her cane, and they walked out the door down the path. Back in those days, you could have burying grounds for the family near the house if you had some land. That's where she was taking him. There was a wrought iron gate, old, and he opened it. And they walked into the small burying ground. He looked, and the tombstones were white in the darkness. And he held up the lantern he was holding. It was then that he saw her grave. Lydia, Lydia. It was true. It was true. Lydia was dead and buried there in the graveyard. He just couldn't believe it and just couldn't understand what had happened. By now he was supporting the lady, and they turned to go, and he just was crying and patting her on the shoulder and saying, I just don't know about this. I know I saw her. I can't believe this." And he turned back for one more look at the pretty gravesite and the gravestone. And in the shadows, he could see, laying over her tombstone, was his grandmother's quilt. In the pines, where the sun never shines, and the cold and the chilly wind blows. True love, don't you lie to me. Tell me, where have you been last night?
Wow, thank you, Cynthia, so much for sharing that local legend that we all know so well. But what a great telling. We appreciate that very much. Okay, everybody, I hope you will stick around for a little bit longer. We have one more storyteller for you. John Maddox is with us, and he has a personal experience to share with us. John is a retired educator. His bio that he sent us says occasional philosopher and longtime supporter of WFDD. Thank you so much for that, John. And he now lives in Wilkes County, and you have a personal story to tell us.
Oh, absolutely. There are those experiences in our life that deserve to be written down, that are so important to us that we just have to sit down and put pen to paper. And so it was from the college days that I wrote The People of the Other Side. Colleges have always gathered together a variety of humanity, but no time in history was this more true than in the late 60s. The social diversity of the American scene was well respected on her campuses, as it was also in my dorm suite. The four of us reflected not only different ethnic and social backgrounds, but also different academic and political leanings. Sewanee has always attracted a more conservative clientele, but during the last years of the Vietnam War, an occasional pacifist, and sometimes even a radical, would get admitted. Charlie was an intellectual, a gentle, insightful friend who at first merely objected to violence, and then in time cloaked himself in the full raiment of an anti-war pacifist. Our university had a dress code that required coats and ties and dress shoes, and that permitted, nay, required academic excellence, and those that have achieved it to wear academic gowns to class. Charlie rebelled. He cut the sleeves from his coat. He ventilated his shoes to make a pair of sandals, and he lined his sedate black gown with a purple and chartreuse paisley. He was vocal in his opposition to the war and true enough to his political and philosophical leanings to tolerate the slurs and innuendos that some young men will hurl at others who refuse to fight. He was comfortable with who he was, even if others weren't. Bill was the antithesis of Charlie. He was sometimes bellicose and always trying to prove his self-worth. He postured, strutted, and bragged his way to respectability. Like Charlie, he was the product of an upper middle-class North Georgian family, but there the similarities ended. I suspected that his behavior reflected more fear than prowess. Fear of what others might think about him and personal, private self-doubts. He was up for every challenge, ready for every opportunity to prove his strength and courage or to dispel what doubts might exist of his ability. I was drawn to college for neither the basest nor the loftiest of motives, but rather for the richness of the variety of experiences that were available. And so it was that, as different as we were, we found common interests and diversions. Caving was one of those interests that attracted all three of us. In the dank, lightless recesses of the underworld, Charlie found a peace that was unknown in the hurried and ambiguous late 60s. He was not there to prove himself, but rather to be himself. Bill found an outlet for dispelling his anxieties of self-worth. He entered each new cave seeking fears to overcome, wishing for a challenge to survive, unconsciously hoping for our failure and his own success. East Tennessee has a profusion of limestone caves etched by an ooze of water into the sandstone strata. Charlie's favorite was Soda Straw Cave. It was visited for its simple beauty. It consisted of an antechamber and one large room, which were both graced with thousands of pencil-thin stalactites. It held no physical challenge, but it was peaceful. Bill preferred Walker Springs Cave. Walker Springs exited the Cumberland Plateau as a full-blown stream. The channel it had cut into the mountain was narrow and choked by many rock falls and cliffs. Climbing skills were essential. Because of the perpetual damp environment, rock slides were hazardous. It is just the kind of challenge that Bill liked. The fourth member of our suite was Kirby, who was uninterested in spelunking until he heard us rehashing the exploration of Appalachie Cave. The cave, Appalachie Cave, and the mountain range, the Appalachians, which are similarly titled, took their name from the Creek Indian language. Appalachie, which literally means people of the other side, was the Creek name for tribes living in and beyond the mountains. This was the only cave in which we ever found archaeological remains. The cave began as a vertical fault 1,000 feet above the plateau. Acids leached from the rotting oak leaves on the mountain forest floor had seeped down the fault, through the layers of sandstone, and slowly dissolved the underlying limestone. The results were a cave that appeared as just a crack at where the rock wall met the valley floor, and then expanded into a domed room 15 feet into the cave. The fault line was visible running the length of the ceiling and terminating in a rubble pile 50 feet into the chamber. The floor rose above, 10 feet from the entrance to the back, while the ceiling dropped 25 feet just to meet it. From all appearances, the cave extended beyond the jumble of rocks, which had broken loose and clogged this narrow point in the limestone. Once inside, the evidence of previous habitation was obvious. A central fire pit on the stone floor had deposited the soot of centuries of fires on the dome above. The fire pit itself was littered with Civil War artifacts, both Union and Confederate, pottery and glass shards, a button, a buckle, eating utensils were the first things that we found. The dorm windowsill display of our find caught Kirby's attention. Although he was a history major, he was fascinated by anthropology. It was his curiosity that led to our more careful examination of the cave's contents. Thus, the exploration of Appalachie involved all four of us. Within 2 weeks of spare time spelunking, we had sifted through what could be found on the relatively smooth floor. Our amateurish attempts turned up an assortment of small animal bones, the lock of a pre-Revolutionary War musket, more Civil War artifacts, and 42 stone projectile points. We then began disassembling the rock fall at the rear of the cave, but had not anticipated how tightly wedged together the jagged rocks would be. It had taken all of one Saturday afternoon to remove just 5 feet of rubble. Our exhaustive efforts that afternoon were rewarded with the discovery of a crushed human hand, long since rotted free of any flesh. The remainder of the skeleton was wedged under the next few feet of stone. We decided that it would have to remain undisturbed for another weekend, but pledged ourselves to secrecy. The following Saturday, we were able to remove the body and open a log-sized hole into another chamber beyond the rubble. The room was large enough that our lights were lost in its darkness. We were unable to enter through the small hole. Our frustrations were compounded by the rock's tendency to bind against each other and then surprised us with an uncontrollable tumble when some keystone was removed. Deciding that we had done enough for the day, we returned home to celebrate our progress with pizza and beer at Clara's. We talked late into the night. speculating on the previous occupants of Appalachia and planning how to access the inner sanctum. Sunday morning, we were awakened to the rattling of windows and sat bewildered for several minutes until the word filtered through the dorm of the morning's earthquake. We dressed, went to early chapel and breakfast before our thoughts returned to the cave. We had not planned to visit Appalachia on Sunday, but the possibility that the quake had further opened the obstruction was intriguing. I had an exam on Monday and had to study, but the other three loaded up and headed down the mountain. I retreated to the library and studied through the night, up until my 10 o'clock class. After the exam, I ate, returned to the dorm, showered, and collapsed on my bunk. I was not aware of the absence of my suitemates until I woke up in the afternoon. They had not returned the night before. Although Sewanee did not have a rescue squad, they did have an active volunteer student, although it was fire department. 8 students were quickly mustered and dispatched down the East Cove. Our anxieties were confirmed. They had found the passage open into the second room. However, an aftershock had rearranged the rock wall and sealed them inside. By the time we removed the debris, they had been stranded in total darkness for 36 hours. Both Charlie and Kirby helped clear the way, but Bill remained hidden in the shadows. I had heard his moaning and assumed that he was injured. In fact, he had to be carried from the cave, although no physical injuries were apparent. On the way to the hospital, he shook, stammered, and babbled about the demons. I had heard that people exposed to prolonged absolute darkness and silence will imagine what they cannot see or hear. His invention was an assortment of swirling, luminescent spirits. Their chants claimed that they were a people called the Appalachia, but Bill saw them not just as Indians, but also as English and French and American. By his account, they were the most horrible assembly imaginable. Charlie and Kirby walked from the cave and drove themselves to the hospital. Neither of them appeared to suffer from any exposure of the darkness. I sat with Charlie as he was examined, and I listened carefully as he described the visions that he had seen when the darkness had overtaken him. There had been ghosts, and he had heard their chants. He remembered their message word for word and quoted it as I transcribed. We are the Appalachia, people of the other side. We are Creek and Cherokee, Pennsylvanian and Virginian, French, Scot, and Englishmen. We are who you are. We chose this place as you have chosen it. Some came in fear. Some sought for peace. Some were drawn into the darkness, following the paths of unknown truths. And we, as you, have found within the shadow of the other side that which we have sought for within our dreams. We are the Appalachia, people of the other side. Although he did not understand their meaning, he found both their manner and their message to be of peace. The swirling and assaulting apparitions seen by Bill were soothing and reassuring to Charlie. Later, I learned that Kirby had seen the same assembly, but reported them as tribal sages and colonial philosophers, the great thinkers of their time. Of the three, only he had found significance in their separate visions of a shared experience. Only he realized that each of them had seen in the darkness what they had been looking for in their lives. Kirby, who had entered the cave seeking knowledge, realized that the Appalachia were not some distant tribe, but rather were apparitions who have always been among us, occupying the dark corners of our minds. For there is hidden within each of us a shadowy image of the person we strive to be. We live our lives in pursuit of this spectral destination. When we, the living, see a ghost, we see only that which is already part of us. If we are at peace, we see gentle spirits. If we are fearful or hateful, the ghost we see will be fearsome or horrific. This is the truth told by the Appalachee. What we seek within our lives, we find within our dreams, and that which is revealed in dreams is already within ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. What an incredible experience. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. That is our last storyteller. We hope you've had a pleasant evening, a little bit of fun and adventure and a little respite from all the news. We wanted to give you something that was different and special. We also want to say a big, big thank you to all of our special guests tonight, without whom we would not have been able to put together this fun evening. I think we have a slide with some information just to put up their names again. Do we have that? There we go. So once again, thank you to Tim Nolan, the owner of Fair Witness Fancy Drinks, Chef Chris Falk, who's the chef at Quanto Basta, our friends at the Forsyth Astronomical Society, and our storytellers for the evening, Dan Sellers, Sandra Edwards, Lona Bartlett, John Maddox, and Cynthia Moore Brown. We would not have been able to do this without you all, and we could not do this without the support of all of our wonderful listeners and fans. Thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate you being here. To follow us on social media for information about more events. Get on our email list for information about more events. You can subscribe on our website. That's WFDD.org. It's a great way to learn about everything that we've got going on. And also we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I think that we even have a Snapchat account now. And if you have questions or comments, you can always be in touch with us at WFDD Public Radio at wfu.edu. Thanks again so much to everybody for joining us, and have a great evening. Good night.